January 22nd, 1943, 9:17 in the morning. Second Lieutenant John George crouches in the ruins of a Japanese bunker west of Point Cruz, his eye pressed to a scope his fellow officers have mocked for 6 weeks. He's 27 years old, Illinois state champion, 0 confirmed kills. The Japanese have 11 snipers operating in these groves. In the past 72 hours, they've killed 14 men from the 132nd Infantry Regiment. George's commanding officer called his rifle a toy. The other platoon leaders called it his mail-order sweetheart. And now, 240 yards away, hidden 90 feet up in a banyan tree, a Japanese sniper is about to discover why that toy just became the deadliest weapon on Guadalcanal. If stories like this remind you why we study history, hit that like button and subscribe to Asad History, because the greatest lessons come from the moments everyone else forgot. Now listen. When John George unpacked his Winchester Model 70 at Camp Forest in Tennessee, the armorer wanted to know if this was meant for deer or Germans. George explained it was for the Japanese. They shipped out before the rifle arrived. George spent the voyage to Guadalcanal watching other men clean their Garans while his own weapon sat in a warehouse in Illinois. He requested it be forwarded through military mail 6 weeks later. In late December 1942, a supply sergeant handed him a wooden crate marked "Fragile Inside" was the rifle he'd saved 2 years of National Guard pay to buy. The rifle weighed 9 pounds. The Lyman Alaskan scope added another 12 ounces. The Garand issued to every other man in his battalion weighed 9.5 pounds with no magnification. George's rifle was bolt action. 5 rounds. The Garand was semi-automatic. 8 rounds. Captain Morris ordered him to leave the sporting rifle in his tent and carry a real weapon. George carried it anyway. The 132nd Infantry had relieved the Marines on Guadalcanal in late December 1942. The Marines had been fighting since August. They'd taken Henderson Field. They'd held it. But they hadn't taken Mount Austin. And they hadn't cleared the Japanese from the coastal groves west of the Matanikau River. Mount Austin stood 1,514 feet tall. The Japanese called it the Gifu. 500 men, 47 bunkers. George's battalion attacked on December 17th. They fought for 16 days. They lost 34 men killed and 279 wounded before they finally took the western slope on January 2nd. By then, George had fired his Winchester exactly 0 times in combat. The jungle around Point Cruz was different. No bunkers, no fixed positions. Just Japanese soldiers who'd retreated west from Henderson Field and dug into the massive trees. Some of those soldiers were snipers. They had scoped Arisaka Type 98s. They knew the jungle. They knew how to wait. On January 19th, a sniper killed Corporal Davis while he was filling canteens at a creek. On January 20th, another sniper killed 2 men from L Company during a patrol. On January 21st, 3 more men died. One of them was shot through the neck from a tree the patrol had walked past twice. The battalion commander summoned George that night. The Japanese snipers were killing his men faster than malaria. He needed someone who could shoot. He wanted to know if that mail-order rifle could actually hit anything. George explained his credentials. Illinois State Championship at 1,000 yards in 1939. 23 years old at the time. Youngest winner in the state's history. 6-inch groups at 600 yards with iron sights. With the Lyman Alaskan, 5 rounds inside 4 inches at 300 yards. The commander gave him until morning to prove it. George spent the night checking his rifle. The Winchester had been packed in Cosmoline for the ocean voyage. He cleaned it again. He checked the scope mounts. He loaded 5 rounds of .30-06 hunting ammunition he'd packed in Tennessee. Military ball ammo, the same cartridge the Garand fired. At dawn on January 22nd, George moved into position in the ruins of a Japanese bunker his battalion had captured 3 days earlier. The bunker overlooked the coconut groves west of Point Cruz. Intelligence said the Japanese snipers operated from the large trees in that area, banyan trees. Some of them reached 90 feet tall with trunks 8 feet thick. A sniper could climb one of those trees before dawn and sit there all day without being seen. George had brought no spotter, no radio man, just his rifle, a canteen, and 60 rounds of ammunition in stripper clips. He settled into the bunker and began to watch the trees through his scope. The Lyman Alaskan had 2.5 power magnification. Not much, but enough to see movement in the branches that the naked eye would miss. The jungle was never silent. Birds, insects, the distant sound of artillery. George had learned to filter out the noise and focus on movement he glassed. A branch moved. No wind, just a small shift. 87 feet up in a banyan tree 240 yards away, George watched. The branch moved again. Then he saw the shape. A man. Dark clothing, positioned in a fork where 3 branches met. The Japanese sniper was facing east. Watching the trail where George's battalion had been moving supplies, George adjusted his scope. 2 clicks right for wind, he controlled his breathing. The Winchester's trigger was glass smooth, 3.5 pounds. He'd spent hours adjusting it at Camp Perry before the war. Now he would find out if a civilian target rifle could kill a man trained to kill him first. George squeezed the trigger. The Winchester kicked into his shoulder. The sound cracked through the jungle. 240 yards away, the Japanese sniper jerked and fell. He dropped through the branches. His body tumbled 90 feet and hit the ground near the base of the banyan tree. George worked the bolt. The empty cartridge ejected. He chambered another round. He kept his scope on the tree, waited for movement. Nothing. The sniper's partner would be close. Japanese snipers worked in pairs, 1 shooter, 1 spotter. If George had just killed the shooter, the spotter was somewhere in that tree or in the trees nearby. George scanned the surrounding banyans. The scope's 2.5 power magnification forced him to search slowly. Each tree could hide multiple men. The jungle canopy created shadows that made shapes impossible to distinguish without careful observation. At 9:43, he found the second sniper. Different tree, 60 yards north of the first. This one was lower, maybe 50 feet up. The Japanese soldier was moving down the trunk, retreating. He'd heard the shot and knew his position was compromised. George aimed, led the movement, fired. The second sniper fell backwards off the tree. His rifle clattered through the branches ahead of him. Both hit the jungle floor within seconds of each other. 2 shots, 2 kills. George reloaded his Winchester from a stripper clip. His hands were steady. His breathing was controlled. This was no different than shooting at Camp Perry, except the targets shot back. At 11:21, a Japanese bullet struck the sandbag 6 inches from George's head. The impact sprayed dirt into his face. He rolled left and pressed himself against the bunker wall. The shot had come from the southwest. Different direction than the first 2 snipers, George waited 3 minutes before moving. He inched back to his firing position and glassed the trees to the southwest. The shooter would have moved after taking the shot. That was basic sniper doctrine: shoot and relocate. But in a jungle, this dense relocation options were limited. George found him at 11:38 3rd tree from the left in a cluster of 5 banyans, 73 feet up. The Japanese sniper had repositioned to a different branch, but remained in the same tree. A mistake. George put the crosshairs on the dark shape and fired. The 3rd sniper fell without making a sound. By noon, George had killed 5 Japanese snipers. Word spread through the battalion. Men who had mocked his mail-order rifle now asked if they could watch him work. George refused. Spectators drew attention. Attention drew fire. The Japanese snipers adapted after the fifth kill. They stopped moving during daylight. George spent the afternoon glassing trees and seeing nothing. At 1600 hours, he returned to battalion headquarters. Captain Morris was waiting. The mockery was gone from his voice. He wanted George back in position at dawn. January 23rd began with rain. Heavy tropical rain that turned the jungle floor into mud and made the trees invisible beyond 100 yards. George sat in the bunker and waited for the weather to clear. The rain stopped at 8:15. By 8:45, enough visibility had returned for work. George spotted the first sniper of the day at 9:12. The Japanese soldier had climbed into position during the rain. Smart. The sound of rain-masked movement. This sniper had chosen a tree 290 yards out. Longer range than yesterday. Also smart. They were learning his capabilities. George compensated for distance and fired. The sniper fell. The sixth kill brought a response George had not anticipated. At 9:57, Japanese mortars began hitting the area around his bunker. They'd triangulated his position based on muzzle flash or sound. The first rounds landed 40 yards short. The second salvo landed 20 yards short. The third salvo would hit the bunker. George grabbed his rifle and ran. He sprinted north along the tree line and dove into a shell crater as the third salvo hit. The bunker he'd occupied moments before disappeared in explosions and flying debris. He relocated to a different position. A fallen tree 120 yards north of the destroyed bunker. The tree provided cover and a clear view of the groves. George settled in and resumed his watch. The Japanese sent more snipers that George had been in position for 9 hours. Morris wanted numbers. George reported 8 confirmed kills over 2 days, 12 rounds fired, 8 kills, 4 misses. Morris assigned George to continue sniper operations starting at dawn on January 24th. That night, George cleaned his Winchester and considered the mathematics. 11 Japanese snipers operating in the Point Cruz groves, 8 now dead, 3 remaining. Those 3 would be the best, the ones who'd survived the longest. And now they knew exactly what George looked like and exactly what rifle he carried. George loaded his Winchester with 5 fresh rounds and tried to sleep. At 300, he gave up and sat in his tent with the rifle across his lap. The rain started again at 4:15. By 5:30, it was heavy enough that dawn operations would be delayed. George used the time to move to a new position. Not the bunker, not the fallen tree. Somewhere the Japanese would not expect. He chose a spot 70 yards south of his previous position. A cluster of large rocks the Marines had used as a machine gun nest back in December. The position offered good cover and overlapping fields of fire into the groves. He settled in and waited for the rain to stop. At 7:43, the rain slowed to a drizzle. Visibility improved. George began glassing trees. At 8:17 on January 24th, he found sniper number 9. The Japanese soldier was positioned in a palm tree 190 yards out, low, only 40 feet up. Unusual. Most snipers climbed high for better sight lines. This one had chosen concealment over elevation. The palm fronds created a natural hide that would be invisible from ground level. But George was not at ground level. He was elevated on the rocks. The angle gave him a view down into the fronds. He could see the dark shape of the sniper's shoulders and head. George aimed, controlled his breathing, began to squeeze the trigger. Then he stopped. Something was wrong. The position was too obvious, too easy. George had been hunting snipers for 3 days. He'd killed 8 men. The remaining 3 would not make elementary mistakes. They would not position themselves where an elevated shooter could spot them, unless it was bait. George lowered his rifle and scanned the surrounding trees. If the sniper in the palm was bait, The real shooter would be positioned to cover him, watching for anyone who took the shot, waiting for muzzle flash, ready to return fire. George glassed the trees methodically, left to right, top to bottom. He checked every tree within 300 yards of the palm. It took 11 minutes. At 8:28, he found the real threat. A banyan tree 80 yards northwest of the palm, 91 feet up. The Japanese sniper was positioned in a perfect hide. Branches and vines concealed him from 3 sides. He had a clear line of sight to George's previous position at the fallen tree. He was waiting for George to appear there or to take a shot at the bait in the palm tree. George had 2 problems. First, the real sniper was watching the wrong location. If George fired at him, the sound would reveal George's actual position. The sniper would relocate before George could work the bolt and chamber another round. Second, if George did nothing, the sniper would eventually realize George was not at the fallen tree and begin searching for him. George decided to use the bait against them. He aimed at the decoy sniper in the palm tree, adjusted for wind, fired. The decoy sniper jerked and fell from the palm. George immediately swung his rifle toward the banyan tree 91 feet up. The real sniper would react to the shot. He would turn toward the sound. That turn would create movement. George saw it. A slight shift. The sniper was repositioning to face George's location. George put the crosshairs on the dark shape and fired before the sniper could fully turn. The real sniper fell. His rifle tumbled after him. 2 shots, 2 kills. But George had revealed his position to anyone else watching. He grabbed his rifle and ammunition and ran. He moved east along the rock line and dropped into a drainage ditch 40 yards away. He pressed himself into the mud and waited. At 8:34, Japanese machine gun fire raked the rocks where he'd been positioned 6 seconds earlier. The bullets kicked up dust and stone fragments. The fire lasted 17 seconds. When it stopped, George counted to 60 before moving. He relocated again, this time to a position 100 yards east. A shell crater partially filled with rainwater. George settled into the crater with water up to his chest. He rested the Winchester on the crater rim and resumed glassing trees. 10 confirmed kills, 1 remaining. The 11th sniper would be the best, the smartest, the most experienced. He'd watched 10 of his comrades die over 3 days. He knew George's tactics. He knew George's rifle. He knew George's approximate location. And somewhere in those trees he was watching, waiting, planning. George scanned the jungle through his scope. The Lyman Alaskan magnification made distant shapes visible but not identifiable. Every dark spot could be a branch or a man. George had to study each one carefully. At 9:47, he realized his mistake. The 11th sniper was not in the trees. He was on the ground, and he was moving toward George's position. George saw the movement at the edge of his peripheral vision, 60 yards south, low to the ground, a shape moving through the undergrowth parallel to the tree line. The Japanese sniper was using the jungle floor vegetation for cover, ferns, vines, fallen branches. He was crawling toward George's last known position at the rocks. George remained motionless in the water-filled crater. The Winchester was already shouldered. His breathing was controlled. But the angle was wrong. The crater rim blocked his view of the approaching sniper. George would have to rise up to get a clear shot. Rising up would expose him. The Japanese sniper stopped moving at 9:52. He'd reached a position 40 yards from the rocks. George watched through his scope. The sniper was studying the rocks, searching for movement, for any sign of his target. George waited. Patience was the primary skill of sniper work. The ability to remain still, to let time pass, to wait for the right moment rather than force a bad shot. At 9:58, the Japanese sniper began moving again. He crawled forward. 35 yards from the rocks, 30 yards, 25 yards. He was approaching from the south side, the side George had used when he evacuated under machine gun fire. George understood the tactic. The Japanese sniper had watched the machine gun attack. He knew George had moved east from the rocks. He was now working his way along the most likely escape route, hunting George the way George had been hunting him. At 10:03, the Japanese sniper reached the rocks. He moved into the machine gun nest and took up a position facing east, toward the drainage ditch, toward the area where George should have relocated. The sniper was now 38 yards from George's actual position in the water-filled crater, but he was facing the wrong direction. His back was exposed. George had a clear shot, center mass, 38 yards. An easy shot even without a scope. But George hesitated. This sniper had survived 10 days of American operations in the Point Cruz groves. He'd outlived 10 other snipers, men who'd been killed because they made mistakes. This man would not make mistakes. The position in the rocks was too exposed, too vulnerable. No experienced sniper would remain there for more than a few seconds. This had to be another decoy, another bait position. George kept his scope on the sniper in the rocks, but expanded his awareness to the surrounding area. If this was bait, the real threat would be positioned to cover it, somewhere with line of sight to anyone who took the shot. At 10:06, George found it. A second Japanese soldier, 70 yards northwest of the rocks, behind a fallen tree trunk. This soldier was not moving, not repositioning, just watching, waiting. His rifle was aimed toward the drainage ditch where George should have been hiding. 2 men, not 1. The 11th sniper had brought support. Or perhaps these were the final 2 snipers, numbers 10 and 11, working together. George made his decision. He could not shoot both men before they reacted. The bolt-action Winchester required him to work the action between shots. That gave them time to locate him and return fire. He needed a different approach. George slowly lowered himself deeper into the water. He submerged until only his eyes and the top of his head remained above the surface. He kept the Winchester pointed skyward to keep water out of the barrel. Then he waited. At 10:13, the Japanese soldier in the rocks stood up. He'd spent 10 minutes watching the drainage ditch and seen nothing. He believed George had moved farther east. He turned and signaled to his partner behind the fallen tree. Both men began moving east, parallel to each other, 70 yards apart. They were executing a sweep, planning to flush George out or find his position. George remained in the water, motionless. The 2 Japanese soldiers moved past his crater. They were now between George and the tree line. Their backs were exposed. George rose from the water. Slowly, silently, he brought the Winchester to his shoulder. Water dripped from the barrel, from his uniform, from his face. He aimed at the closer soldier, the one who'd been in the rocks, now 42 yards away. George fired. The soldier dropped. George worked the bolt, chambered another round, swung the rifle toward the second soldier behind the fallen tree.